Now, what you'll see is our problem is not the past, our problem is not the present, our problem is the future. And the problem is that we have people that are very myopic, that are relying upon the past. When you're flying a plane, and I came down on one this morning, you generally better be looking ahead rather than the rear view mirror. And when you look ahead, you'll see a tsunami of spending and debt that could swamp our ship of state. And we are not prepared. We are not prepared. And in fact, if anything, Washington is making it worse, not better, based upon the current path they're on. Now, in fairness, George Walker Bush was probably the most fiscally irresponsible president in the history of the United States. Debt almost doubled during his 8 years. But guess what? His record could be beat by Barack Obama. And there are a lot bigger numbers. Because it's easy to spend somebody else's money. It's even easier to spend somebody else's money when the person's money who you're spending is too young to vote and not even born yet. And that is what is going on. It is massive taxation without representation. Because keep in mind, there's only two kinds of taxes: current taxes and deferred taxes. And that's where we're headed. We must not allow that to happen. Now, here's something that you may or may not know. At the end of World War II, when we had the all-time high level of debt as a percentage of the economy, 122%, we owed it all to Americans. There was no foreign debt. Why? Because Americans saved. Americans invested in their country's future. Americans invested in their family's future. But in 1990, 19% of our public debt was held by foreign lenders. In early 2009, it was 49%. Now it's over 50%. And it's rising. Why? Because we're great at spending, but not too great at savings. And while Americans have now started to save somewhat, because they now know what a rainy day is, and they now know that the too big to fail concept is false because of what happened within the past year, so they're starting to be more prudent about their spending. They're starting to be more prudent about their taking on debt, and they're starting to save more. And saving rates have gone from 0 to negative to 5 to 6%. Now, that's still low by industrial nation standards, but it's a lot better than 0 to negative. So we're at 5 to 6%. Here's the problem. That's personal savings. The problem is the government is dissaving faster than individuals save. It's spending way more money than it takes in. Our deficits in the last 3 years have gone from $162 billion to $459 billion to this year, when you consider Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, $1.6 trillion plus, 10 times in 2 years. Next year, it's expected to be $1.4 trillion, and it's expected to basically be $1 trillion or more for a while. That's not sustainable. We had for a long time a philosophy where we would attempt to balance the budget over an economic cycle. When there was recession or a war, we'd run deficits, but when times were good and it was peacetime, we tried to be able to pay some of that down, or at least not add to it, okay? That changed within the last 30 years, when it became acceptable, other than the times of budget controls, to run deficits of, 2% of the economy, even if we were at peace and the economy was growing. Well, then what happens when you're at war? I put those in quotes because we haven't declared war since World War II. Or you have a recession or a crisis. Then deficits and debt levels skyrocket. $1.6 trillion is 11.2% of GDP. We're basically borrowing $1 for every dollar of revenue. We're spending twice as much as we're taking in, or we did in 2009. Spent twice as much. So, dependency. Washington has to use certain rules to allow the official scorekeepers to project what the future will look like, and the official scorekeeper for the Congress is the Congressional Budget Office, which is nonpartisan, and they do a good job. But the problem is they have a lot of rules that they have to follow. They're supposed to actually assume that, all tax cuts will expire. They're supposed to actually assume that when Congress says that they're going to cut back on provider payments, which they don't do, but they say they're going to do it, that they'll do it. All right? And as a result of that, they have something called the baseline. The baseline is the red. That's basically what CBO says that the future looks like based on the baseline. But the alternative is the blue. That's a more realistic assessment of where we're headed. That's before health care reform.